consider the facts here. Red Dead Redemption 2 and Mafia the Old Country, released 7 years apart, are both about a guy who rides horses in a hot country, which means they're exactly the same, and so it's perfectly reasonable to compare them like to like on how they handle inconsequential details like, does a fence break if you shoot it, or how much does water splash if you shoot it, or will a guy cradle his wound if you shoot him? Sure, we might be comparing billion-dollar apples to bulk discount Sicilian lemons here, but it does prove conclusively that Red Dead 2 was the last good video game made with real passion and not to further some sort of agenda. Oh, I can't even do this facetiously, but it seems as though the internet is obsessed with comparing Red Dead Redemption 2 to everything that comes out, from the latest Assassin's Creed to the new Mafia to even Death Stranding 2 of all things. But why? What is it about Red Dead 2 that makes it the bar to clear, even now, after the best part of a decade? And why does it seem like games and the technology they run on are getting less impressive as time goes on? Well, let's talk about that. And I'll tell you straight off the bat, it's got nothing to do with developers being lazy. There is a good reason why certain types of outlets are fixated on the idea of Red Dead Redemption 2 as the gold standard that every subsequent game fails to live up to on some level, because it's a hugely popular game from a beloved studio and the social media algorithms know that. But there's very little value in producing content about it unless you can tie it to a new release or some kind of fresh news story, because until there's a remaster or a sequel announced, there's not really anything to say about it that people don't already know. And as much as you don't gotta hand it to them under any circumstances, these content creators do actually have a point. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a stone cold classic and remains one of the most technically impressive game worlds ever realised. Its map is outrageously vast and diverse, with realistically populated urban, small town and rural environments of every kind. Its attention to detail in its world simulation and how the player can interfere with it is frankly staggering. We haven't seen anything quite like it before or since, apart from, other Rockstar games, of which it is considered the best, and for good reason. There's a cottage industry of gaming content out there that is obsessed with unfavourably comparing new releases to genre classics. If the internet flags you as a gamer, you probably have been fed a lot of these comparison videos that compare cherry-picked footage with the goal of demonstrating that new things are bad and old things are good. It's our generation's equivalent of pining for racist sitcoms based on the war, or pining for the war. They're often short form as well, so they'll be less than a minute long, and all the footage will be scaled down to a portrait frame, which is obviously bull. We're clearly not talking about a Digital Foundry level of analysis here. Yes, I'm allowed to mention them, and no, we're not enemies now. I can't believe Digital Foundry walked out on it. Red Dead 2's remarkably future-proof technology and the gorgeous art direction that give it its timeless look is a gift to people who make this sort of petty outrage farming content, because it's getting long in the tooth, and we are at a point where I think instinctively we would expect it to look its age by now. 7 years in terms of the video games industry, this massive ongoing autobahn collision between artistic expression and tech product. I mean, that's a lifetime. The amount of time between Red Dead Redemption 2 and Mafia the Old Country is the same amount of time as there was between the original Grand Theft Auto on PS1 and San Andreas on the PS2. And the difference between those games is mind-blowing. On that basis, you'd expect Mafia the Old Country to be almost as realistic as actually going to Sicily, as if Sicily needs any more lemons. But everyone watching this knows that's not the case, because we just don't have those massive generational leaps in technology anymore. But why? Well, Moore's Law is not the law. The fact that 7 years have passed since Red Dead 2 means absolutely nothing. It's a pithy and effective thing to point out if you want to convince people that video games are crap now, for reasons. But the passage of time doesn't guarantee whatever a YouTuber's narrow definition of progress is. I'm not a YouTuber, I'm a member of the specialist press. When I started high school, there was no such thing as an MP3 player. It did not exist as a concept. And by the time I'd left high school, everyone had an iPod. And that's only like 4 years because I'm a thicko, right? So in that short amount of time, we went from the concept basically not existing to it reaching its zenith. The portable digital music player with capacity measured in gigabytes and an intuitive interface that your granny could use. Now, since all the things we used to carry around with us have been superseded by everyone carrying around a portable supercomputer that is your iPod, your phone, your telly, your library, your local branch of Tesco, a Spirit Level, and your mum, it's fair to say the rate of change in electronics is a bit more sedate than it used to be. I don't know about you, but the phone I have now more or less does the same my iPhone 4 did 15 years ago. And it does it in the exact same way. In fact, if you went back and showed this to a person in 2010, they'd know exactly what it was, they'd instinctively know how to use it, and if anything, they'd probably wonder how you can manage with something that's so big. I mean, to someone rocking an iPhone 4, that's like a broadsheet. If you went back to the time of Diocletian and showed a Roman irrigation engineer one of these, they'd probably ask you not to wave a piece of obsidian at them while they were trying to drain a lake with an Archimedes screw. The exact same Archimedes screw his ancient Greek counterpart was using hundreds of years earlier. Like hundreds of years earlier. And what the f am I talking about? Well, I'm just trying to illustrate that the rate of technological advancement is not and has never been constant. Progress is not guaranteed in tech or science or medicine or anything. We've just come to expect it because we happen to have lived through a time of accelerated change. And I think our brains have also been cooked by concepts like Moore's Law. If you haven't heard of Moore's Law, it's often expressed or understood as roughly a doubling of computing power every 2 years. What Gordon Moore was actually doing was observing that the number of transistors that Intel could cram into a single chip was doubling at a consistent rate, and extrapolating that to predict where the technology would be a decade down the line. But Gordon Moore was speaking in his capacity as a businessman as much as he was speaking as an engineer. And the thing about businesses is that they like stable, predictable growth. In a nutshell, Intel likes knowing when and how it's going to sell its new chips. And although every chip manufacturer since has tried to keep Moore's Law going, because their businesses all operate on the assumption that it will hold like forever, it is no longer a sure thing. In fact, a lot of businesses have decided that it's already over, and that's rapidly becoming the consensus. And that's also one of the reasons, by the way, that the old paradigm of games consoles getting cheaper after they've been out for a few years, you can forget about that as well. Miniaturization is reaching a hard limit. So this assumption we all have as a society that technology just gets better somehow doesn't hold up anymore. And this phenomenon that's kind of broken gaming, where games from 10 or more years ago are still holding their own against new releases that have all the current tools available to them, is evidence of that. One of the firms that has declared Moore's Law dead and buried is Nvidia, which, not being shy of putting its money where its CEO's mouth is, has been spending its vast R&D budget, thank you crypto bros, on coming up with ways to continue improving what their products are capable of in smarter and more targeted ways than simply increasing their raw power. Technologies like DLSS and ray reconstruction, for example, are designed to make extremely marketable features like ray tracing, 4K, triple-digit frame rates achievable on silicon, which just doesn't have the raw numbers to do that sort of thing without cheating somehow. And the upshot is that noticeably better results are achieved with only modest increases in raw power. The goal is to do more with less, or to do a lot more with only a little more. Work smarter, not harder, all that. Which brings me to the last point. You are not Unreal 5's customer. The difference between Red Dead 2 and Mafia: The Old Country isn't just the span of time between them, it's the sheer scale and scope of the projects. Now, we know a lot less about Mafia's development story than we do about Red Dead 2's, by virtue of the fact that Mafia's only just come out, but we know enough to make a few educated guesses about the resources available to it. Mafia: The Old Country's developer Hangar 13 took charge of the Mafia series in the mid-2010s, which led to its first release, the much maligned but honestly not that bad Mafia 3. Now, it's interesting that Mafia 3 is probably the closest equivalent to Red Dead 2 in Hangar 13's entire back catalogue. It's a proper open world with all the side content and icon janitoring that implies, and just like Red Dead 2, it runs on a proprietary engine. This was back when Hangar 13 was a bit bigger and had the resources to maintain its own game engine, and without getting too much into it, because hell, this is already dragging on. Since those halcyon days, Hangar 13 has properly been through the ringer. We're talking huge expensive projects getting cancelled, multiple layoffs. One of its 4 studios lost 2/3 of its people in one go at one point. The Hangar 13 that made Mafia the Old Country is a much skinnier beast than the well-resourced one that made Mafia 3 all those years ago. And that's why, instead of a full-fat Mafia 4, we've had a remake of the first game, a linear mission-based experience, and The Old Country, which was marketed as a return to the series' roots, i.e. a much smaller, more focused experience. Not because of any artistic restraint, you understand, because it's cheaper to do that. Before you start typing down there that Mafia 3 isn't as good as Red Dead either, what you talking about, Jim? Well, yeah, it's not, but even in their heyday, Hangar 13 was nowhere near as big or as rich as Rockstar. They never had the money to have one guy spend 6 months on making horse balls react realistically to wind chill. Only Rockstar can do that because they have more money than the mob, or God. Rockstar has the resources to build a hyper-realistic, reactive world the player has a convincing presence in. It's one of the most expensive games of all time, with a budget in the hundreds of millions. An estimated 1,600 developers worked on it across all disciplines. Now, if everyone at Hangar 13 worked on Mafia the Old Country, including like receptionists and accountants and all that, and that's quite an assumption, its development team is less than 300 people. So that's less than a fifth of the team it took to make Red Dead 2. On a much longer turnaround, by the way. So look, even accepting the dubious idea that Mafia the Old Country doesn't look any more graphically advanced than Red Dead 2, the question shouldn't be how come this 7-year-old game beats this brand new one in direct comparison. The question should be, how the f did Hangar 13 get anywhere close to Red Dead 2? With the resources it had. And if it wasn't close, those guys wouldn't be comparing it. And yeah, part of the answer is that they didn't spend any time on inconsequential like fences breaking realistically when you shoot them, or horse balls, or can't really think of anything else apart from horse balls. Now, I'm kind of fixated on that. But the other part of the answer is that Hangar 13, like lots of other studios, including CD Projekt Red, has switched entirely over to Unreal 5, which is not for your benefit or mine, frankly. It doesn't really matter to the end user which brush is being used to paint the picture, after all. All game engines have their pros and cons. I don't understand them because I'm not a game dev. And while a lot of Unreal Engine's marketing is aimed at punters like me and you, so its splash screen is mentally associated with good graphics and is therefore a mark of quality, most of the recent marketing isn't so much about how great the games look. They're more about how much work the developer had to do to get there. If you look at Unreal's procedural time-saving technologies like Nanite, Lumen, or MetaHuman, the big innovations here are in automating or making obsolete the kind of busy work that developers used to have to do, such as producing level of detail assets, or pre-baking light maps, or pressing F5 to make it good. I don't know, I'm not a game dev. The upshot of all this is that the ancient, decrepit Red Dead 2 being able to hold a candle to Mafia the Old Country at all doesn't represent any kind of regression. It demonstrates that the art and technical direction of one of the most expensive games of all time was built to last. I should think so, frankly. It demonstrates that technologies like Unreal Engine 5 and others have democratized the kind of fidelity that 7 years ago could only be achieved with bespoke technology and a bigger wage bill than Real Madrid, and that the economic feasibility of AAA game development is undergoing a massive rethink because it's just not as sustainable as it was in its 2018 form unless the end product is guaranteed to make $1 billion. Far from being a regression, it is technological progress. It's just not the kind that brings your wee brother closer to his ideal of ultimate photorealism where you push the bayonet slowly into somebody's throat and then have to go to therapy. Mafia the Old Country is a bit of an experiment. Can a studio make rent by knocking out these smaller games? Focused experiences that have AAA production values, but without the AAA statistics and, crucially, without the AAA price point. Is there an audience for that, or do too many people habitually believe they're being shortchanged unless they're literally playing a Rockstar game? Only time will tell, but I'll leave you with this. I'm very suspicious of a lot of these outlets that obsessively compare Red Dead 2 or whatever to newer games, because it's always pretty clear that the point isn't to compare and contrast the differences between old games and modern ones in a sort of academic way, but to deliberately feed the notion that in recent years gaming has fallen off, that there's no passion in the industry anymore, that all the talent has left and been replaced with political activists because their engagement depends on the impotent anger and malaise that characterises the information dystopia era that we currently live in. The sense that everything was better before. Before what? Before when? Well, you know, I just want to go back. Back where? Back when? Well, you know, when I had light in my eyes and I still had my whole life ahead of me and I could go out with my mates whenever I wanted and I didn't have responsibilities and debt and life wasn't an endless meander from one disappointment to the next. I could still see my Taja. And Red Dead 2 had just come out. Alright, I was only asking.